Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Mem Hey of Masechet Nedarim, one of the shorter dafim in Daf Yomi, with a total of only 10 lines of Gemara. But there's going to be a lot to say. Part of the reason that there's only 10 lines is because Ron has a lot to say, and the topics are particularly interesting. So let's see what we've got, and we'll go through it, and hopefully we'll be able to enjoy this learning that we have together. So let me give let's back up, because we sort of ended on a real cliffhanger yesterday, because we had given one answer to a question. But that question requires a lot of setup. Indeed, it was all of the entire day yesterday was setting up the question. So let's go over that question so that we can really remember exactly where we were at. So we saw a brisa yesterday that detailed two rules. And maybe I actually should, although on my screen that's where I begin, maybe I really need to begin with our Mishnah, because we're really going to be focusing on the Mishnah that we learned on Mem Gimel, and where we had at the very end of the Mishnah. And again, we use the example of Esav and Yaakov. Esav has made the Neder that says Yaakov's not allowed to benefit from him. So Esav is the Madir, Yaakov is the Mudar. And so Yaakov's not allowed to benefit for him, but unfortunately, Yaakov has nothing to eat, and the Yaakov and Esav are traveling together, and there's no one else with them. And so, what can Esav do? He actually feels bad at this moment. He's not such a Rasha, and so as a result, he wants to help. He wants to help out his brother Yaakov, and so he says, "You know what? I'm going to put my food on this rock, and I'm going to make it hefker." And so as a result, Yaakov will be able to take the food and will be able to eat. And we said at the end of that Mishnah that Rabbi Yossi does not allow this. He would say, no, he can't do that. It would still be prohibited for Yaakov to take that food. It would be considered Yaakov benefiting from Esav. Hello. And so when we said that, so then we wanted to understand, why was it? The Gemara began with the Rabbi Yochanan's explanation of why Rabbi Yossi would forbid it. And we said that the reason that he would forbid it is because Rabbi Yossi believes that just like if I were to give a gift to somebody, the gift, so we'll talk about this mouse, as I often do. If I were to want to give this mouse to James, so then until James picks it up, it belongs to me. And so similarly, Rabbi Yossi says the same thing. According to Rabbi Yochanan, the same thing is true for hefker. That if I instead of giving this as a gift to James, I make it hefker, and James then picks it up. Just as with the gift, it does not leave my possession until James picks it up, so too with the hefker situation. Hefker does not reflect, yes, you need both of them. So just as hefker does not, just as a gift, it does not leave my possession until it goes into the possession of somebody else. Similarly with hefker. So that was our Mishnah. And then we had a brisa that was very confusing, because the brisa had two halves, and one of it seemed to be more like the concept of hefker leaving the person's possession right away. That's the first approach. And the second approach, and the second part of the Mishnah is the second part of the brisa is going to be more like Rabbi Yossi's approach, where the hefker doesn't leave the possession of the owner until after somebody else picks it up. So let's go through what that brisa said. So the brisa's first half said that if somebody were to declare their field ownerless and they don't have any date limitation in that declaration, well, then one is allowed to retract that declaration for 3 days. And then it would be, if you retract it, it would be as if it was never hefker. But once it remained hefker for 3 days, then it's no longer retractable. And so this is very much like the Tanakama position in our Mishnah, because it has effectively left the original owner's possession. And so as a result, because it has left the original owner's possession, if he does take it back, he's not going to be chayav on Trumas and Maasros, because he will have taken that field from Hefker and not have owned it the entire time. So that is very much like the Tanakama. On the other hand, we had the second opinion, the second half of that brisa, and the second half of that brisa said that if you set your field to be ownerless for a set period of time, for a set number of days, months, years, etc., well, then for the entire time of that set period, you are able to retract, and it's as if you never set it. And so, as a result, that retraction is like Rabbi Yossi, because what does it mean to retract? It means that it really never left your possession, and that's exactly what Rabbi Yossi says in our Mishnah. That he's, according to Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yossi says in our Mishnah that if Esav puts the food down, it still belongs to Esav until Yaakov picks it up. And so, as a result, if Esav were to re-pick up that food, well, then it would be as if he never lost it at all. Even after 3 days, correct? It's as long as the period that you say. If one says that it's going to be hefker for 1 day, well, then he doesn't need to pick it up after 3 days, because as soon as the day is over, it goes back to him if nobody else has taken it. So we're talking about the entire length, even at the very end of the period that he says. So the most relevant is if you say a week, a month, a year, 7 years. If you say a long enough period, so then if it's longer than 3 days, the answer of the second half of that brisa was you can retract the entire rest of that period, even beyond the 3 days. So that seems to be very much like Rabbi Yossi from our Mishnah, as Rabbi Yochanan understands him. So that was the question, and we offered 2 answers to that question. The explanation number 1 is that Ula, offered by Ula, is that really the entire brisa is the rabbis, that the entire brisa is consistent with the Tanakhama. So why is it that there is this ability to retract even after 3 days in the second part? Well, the answer is because the rabbis agree with Rabbi Yossi if you have something hefker for a set period of time, because that is not a full hefker. And so as a result, because you've retained some aspect to it, it is a less full hefker, and therefore that would explain why the rabbis would say that they agree with Rabbi Yossi in that circumstance. On the other hand, we have Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish said, no, it's not that we're going to change the brisa to understand it as being all consistent with the rabbis. We're going to say that the brisa is actually all Rabbi Yossi. And so, well, then in that case, why is it that it's only for 3 days in the first part of the brisa that the person's allowed to retract? Meaning, shouldn't he always be allowed to retract? As long as nobody else has taken possession. So if I make my field hefker, it shouldn't be 3 days. It should be forever. If I want to retract it in a week, in 14 days, and whenever, I should be allowed to retract it as long as nobody else has come into the field to take it from me. And so why don't we do that? And the Gemara explained that we don't do that because Rabbi Yossi wants us to remember the halachot of a hefker field. And he's worried that if, in fact, we were to say that the owner can take it back, we would be worried that somebody, in which case the person is chayav d'oraisa to give Trumas and Maasros, because it's as if it never left his possession at all. We're worried that when now somebody else comes into that field and takes it, we're worried that that person will say, well, look, if the owner went back and took it himself, he would be chayav Trumas and Maasros d'oraisa. So I must be chayav Trumas and Maasros d'oraisa also. And we would lose the halacha that if in fact somebody takes something out of hefker, they're not obligated in Trumas and Maasros. So what's so bad? Let the person give some extra Trumas and Maasros. Well, the concern is that you might give Trumas and Maasros from this field for a field in which one is not chayav in trumas and maasros, and you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to give from one field to another field if the obligation is different. If the obligation is the same, you're okay. But if the obligation is different, where one is biblical and one is not, that's going to be a problem. Okay, so now, so all right, and so that was all of that, and then the Gemara, and so we still haven't gotten to the question that we're now going to offer the second answer to. So the Gemara then quoted another brisa for us, and the brisa that the Gemara quoted was that someone declared a vineyard hefker, but then he worked it the next morning. And so the brisa says that all the different kinds of gifts that are specifically for the poor, those kinds of gifts are going to actually be owed. So the Mishnah, the brisa, excuse me, mentioned peret and olelot. Those are different. One, if a couple of grapes fall from while you're collecting them, so then if one or two grapes fall, then they have to be left behind. And olelos are if they're underdeveloped, and then there's shechachos if you forgot to pick the grapes off of one or two vines. And then finally there's peah, which is the corner of the field. All of those gifts are left for the poor people to come through the field and take what's left so that they have something to eat. And so, but you're not obligated in trumos and maasros. That's what that brisa says. It says you're not chayav in maasros. So what does that mean if you're not chayav in maasros? Now, if we're talking about Ula and the rabbis, so then it can all work, because what we mean is that you're not chayav deoraisa. You are chayav derabanan, but you're not chayav deoraisa. And so as a result, that's why, so we can make all of our brisas work together according to Ula. But the problem is that Reish Lakish says that in this situation, right, if we are following Rebbe Yossi, in this situation, even that really we should wait 3 days, and if we wait 3 days, only then will it be hefker. And the only reason that it would be hefker is really biblically, it's not hefker if the person takes it back, because really if he takes it back, he should be obligated. But we just wanted to make sure that we didn't forget the laws of hefker. So as a result, we said that the person can't take it back after 3 days. But the point is that according to Reish Lakish, according to Rebbe Yossi, based on that earlier brisa, it's always a biblical commandment. So how in the world could we end up having a case where the owner takes it back and is not obligated in maasros at all? So we offered one explanation yesterday, as if we want to take a look at the last few words of Mem Daled Amud Bet. We said Amar Lach, Reish Lakish would say to you, last line, Ki Amri Anna Rebbe Yossi, that where I said it was according to Rebbe Yossi, that was that other brisa. But Rabbanan, this other brisa is the rabbis. And the rabbis, again, are the ones who say that hefker does work, hefker does take it out of your possession, and therefore, even if you go back in and you get it back, that is going to only be a rabbinic obligation to give trumas and maasros. So that was answer number one. Now, answer number two that we're finally ready to give is a big and important issue in connection with the idea of hefker. And that is that it matters how many people you say it in front of. So let's take a look. So ibayis ema, if you want to say, you can give the following answer. Had afkare ba'anpe train, that in the case where the hefker is less strong, and as a result, if one takes it back, essentially they're still biblically obligated to offer the trumas and maasros. So that is where you say it only in front of two people. But in the brisa, in which in the vineyard case, where we say that the retraction, that even after the retraction, when the next morning the guy goes into the field and he works the field, that he's no longer obligated in trumas and maasros, that there we're talking about where the person said it was Hefker in front of 3 people. And so as a result, because he said it was Hefker in front of 3 people, so it had as the Ron explains, it had a real voice of Hefker. And so as a result, it is a full Hefker. And so even Rabbi Yossi, who in our Mishnah, remember in our Mishnah, the specific case that we were talking about, Esav put the food on the rock and didn't give it to anybody because there wasn't anyone else there. And so as a result, that's why Rabbi Yossi says that's not a good Hefker. But if in fact somebody were to make it Hefker in front of 3 people, well, that is a good Hefker. And now we're going, and because that would have a sufficient voice. And whereas if you only did it in front of 2 people, so then it wouldn't get out there, it wouldn't be as publicly known. And so as a result, that isn't a substantive action. That action doesn't have any meat to it. So, all right, to Amri, and now we have a support for this explanation because we have Rabbi Yochanan's statement to Amr Rabbi Yochanan, B'shum Rabbi Shimon ben Yehud Tzadok, that what does he say in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehud Tzadok? He says, Kol hamafkir b'fnei shlosha havi hefker. If you actually say something's ownerless in front of 3 people, that works. B'fnei shnayim lo havi hefker. But in front of 2 people, it doesn't work. And so this is now very consistent with the whole thing, and we can make everything according to Rabbi Yossi. That in fact all the brises could be according to Rabbi Yossi, and this is according to Rabbi Yochanan's understanding. So all right, so now that we said that, though, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi disagrees. He says Devar Torah, that really according to the Torah, afilu be'echad havi hefker. One person is sufficient to make the item hefker. Umatam amru b'shlosha. But so why, in fact, did the rabbi say that if you want to if you want to make something really hefker, you should do it in front of 3? Because the truth is that if I make something hefker and I make it hefker only in front of James, and James then takes it, I have the ability to say to James, especially if it's a field. If it's a field, I have the ability to say to James, listen, James, you may think you own that, but I still own it. And he's like, but you made it hefker. And I'm like, well, what's your evidence? And he said, well, you made it hefker in front of me. Well, that's not good enough evidence because I say I didn't make it hefker. So obviously, if that were not true, I'd be lying. But in any event, it would be difficult for James to prove the fact that I had said it was hefker. So as a result, the recommendation is if you want to actually make something hefker, you should make it hefker in front of 3 people, because that way you have one person who could take the possession from that person and the other 2 can testify about it. Okay, so what is the halacha on this? So let's take a look. One of the nice things about learning.
Question?
Please go ahead.
Isn't the one who picks it up an interested party? And so how is he considered exactly the valid? But then so then the third person is just one person's word against another.
No. The whole point of having the third person is not going to testify, right? The third person is you're absolutely right. He's interested. So let's do, you, Charlie, and James all see me declare my field hefker. And so
so that's the reason for 3.
We're going to say,
right, okay.
So hold on just a second. So now, Dov, you decide you're going to take my field. And so the point is that yes, you absolutely cannot testify, but James and Charlie can testify. And so as a result, absolutely, that's exactly the point. That's
okay. So it's 2 additional people. Okay, I got it.
Yeah. Exactly. All right. So let's now, again, one of the nice things about learning Maseches Nedarim is that we have the Ran on the side of our page. And so as a result, we have often he'll tell us the halacha. And here's a nice short Ran that gives us the halacha. And so we can jump into it. So the last third to last line of the Ran of the end of this parak, Ula Inyan halacha b'buksaihu de Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. When it comes to this argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Tina and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, we actually say that the halacha is like Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. To Amar Dvar Torah afilu be'echad havi hefker, that in fact only one person is enough to make something hefker. Umatam amru bishlosha kadei sheyeh echad zocha ushnayim me'idim. And so that you can have one person take it from the person who made it hefker, and the other two can be witnesses. Hilkach midivrei sofrim einu hefker ad sheyifker bifnei shlosha. And as a result, that we actually make this almost like a rabbinic requirement. That in fact, if you want to make something hefker, you should do it in front of three. And although one might have thought that the reason would be is that you're actually, because often when we say that you need three men, I should say, when you need three men, it's often because we say, oh, you need a court. But that's not the case here, interestingly enough. Here it's really, you need one and then two witnesses. But in any event, so in fact, if you want to make something hefker, you should do it in front of three people. V'chein kasav harambam, and that's in fact what the Rambam writes. B'perek beis mehilchos Nedarim, in the second chapter of Hilchos Nedarim. Now, the interesting, all right. So let us now jump to the next perek, and as we pick up with the next perek,
before we go on, I have a question.
Absolutely, go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, so we're talking about the difference between the right of hefker and rabbinic hefker, and we also had a difference between D'oraita truma u'maasrot and rabbinic truma u'maasrot. There's some pretty big implications about the difference between biblical truma and rabbinic truma.
Yes.
In terms of what you can do with it. And then there's the question that, as far as I can tell, has never been resolved. Do we even have biblical truma today?
Yeah, I'm not certainly in the place to answer that question, but do you have a specific question? Because I guess there's the question of, do we have that, which is a question, but is there something that you were?
Yeah, so going back, let's say you just declare something hefker before one person. Do you have to be concerned about the fact that it might take effect biblically? Are the rabbis able to make that, if it does take effect biblically, do the rabbis really have the power to make the tevel not tevel?
Yeah, I mean, that was effectively the way I understood Rabbi Yossi. The answer to that question is that it's not that the rabbis are making that in fact the rabbis are not making the tevel not tevel. They're saying, in fact, according to Rabbi Yossi, if you were to according to Reish Lakish's understanding of the brisa with the where you make your field hefker, and so again, Reish Lakish says that brisa is all about is all Rabbi Yossi, and so when you make your field hefker and you don't have a time period, you can undo it for 3 days, but after the 3 days, you can no longer undo it. Mm-hmm. And the way we're understanding Rabbi Yossi in that is as follows, that in fact, if the person takes it back after 3 days, he is in fact biblically obligated. It is not he's in fact biblically obligated to offer that Trumas and Maasros, because in fact he really technically he's taking it back completely. It's as if he never made it hefker, but we're going to effectively treat him on the he's going to end up with the biblical obligations of Trumas and Maasros, but he's also going to end up with the rabbinic, whatever the rabbinic ramifications are of him taking the field from hefker. So there may not be any, but the point is that we're going to end up being strict on both sides, is the way I would understand it. And so as a result, I don't think that the rabbis are affirmatively saying in any case that, oh, this was obligated in Trumas Maasros D'oraisa, and we're going to say it's not obligated. I don't think that that's how we end up reading this. That
okay, but even if that's the case,
what was that?
Even so, Charlie, I mean, it's clear that the rabbis do give themselves the power to determine a reality in the face of or to determine the law in the face of a biblical obligation. For example, the rules of Rove, and someone who finds some meat in the street, and
Right.
if the whole thing, if it could well be that meat actually came from the one non-kosher butcher shop, but nonetheless, and then it would not be kosher meat, but the rabbis or consider themselves to have the power to declare by the rules of Rove that this meat is permissible.
Sure. And this
So it's
sounds
another
like
example.
the entire discussion is according to the opinion that is not universally accepted, that there still is biblical Trumot and Meiser today.
Well, I don't know that I would make that assumption, because the machlokas that we're talking about is a machlokas among yes.
Later in the
Yeah.
Yerushalmi and Trumot, they actually are not sure whether Trumot has ever been biblical after the destruction of Beit Rishon.
Yeah.
And they never come to a conclusion about that, and I don't think the Rishonim did either.
No, you're absolutely right. That certainly it seems like even after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, that they're envisioning a biblical truma.
Okay, and
I think that's accurate.
The rabbis do have the power to say it didn't take effect, and then you're going to do it anyway.
It doesn't seem like they're just talking theoretically. It seems like the examples are meant to be applied for that particular time, the time of those brises. So, and since that the brises most likely post destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, so that I think that seems like a reasonable inference that Charlie's making. But I haven't looked at it. I definitely haven't looked at that issue.
But on and on this. I don't spend more time on it.
What was that?
We could go on and on this, but I don't want to spend any more time on it.
Okay, no worries.
Well, what better day than when we have a short doc?
Exactly. It's a perfect day to discuss this topic. Okay, so now we come up to a new parak. This is parak Hashutvim, and this Mishnah, and the reason that there's so much Ran on it is this Mishnah is an important source of the concept of Breira. So I'll remind us what Breira is. Breira is the concept where if I determine the nature of something later, it can actually retroactively be understood in that way. So for example, let's say, well, let's just jump in, because we don't need to come up with an example. We can do the example that the Mishnah offers. Hashutvim, we have two partners. So, Dov and Charlie own a field together, or own a courtyard together. Shenadru hanazemizeh, but they didn't get along, and so as a result, they each said that I don't want to get hana from the other person. But they both have they share the rights to a particular courtyard. Asurin lichnas lekatzer. The Tanakama's position is they're not allowed to go into the chutzner that they share, because if Charlie goes in, he'll be benefiting from Dov's half, and if Dov goes in, well, he's benefiting from Charlie's half, because they are effectively intermingled, right? And presumably we're talking about a chutzner that's too small to divide, and so as a result, or they've chosen not to divide it. So as a result, it's like a joint ownership in the entirety. I can't remember if that's the exact terminology. But the point is that it's not as if you own just half of the underlying land, but you own half of the whole thing. So every little piece you own half of, as opposed to owning half of the actual space. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Zen nechnas l'to shelo, the Zen nechnas l'to shelo. Rabbi Eliezer says, nah, that's not we don't have to worry about it at all. And this is where you see the breira. The breira is that when Dov goes in, it's by definition going to be his half that he's entering, and when Charlie goes in, it's going to be his half, because by definition, Charlie could confirm which law of physics we're talking about, but they can't be in one place. So as a result, anytime that Dov is in a place, so that was the piece that is belonging to him. That's part of his 50%. And we can cut this 50% in lots of different ways. It can be cut in a time perspective. It can be cut in a geographic perspective. So as a result, but because they can't be in the same place at the same time, so by definition, we're going to have that they're not, that they're two different, that wherever they are, they're in their own space. Okay, so as a result, that is this interesting debate. And again, the Ron explains that this is really all about Brera. And so now the question is, okay, well, if in fact Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov says there's Brera, so then what is Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov going to say about somebody setting up a mill or an oven or a business? Can Dov do that and say, well, just as I am entering the courtyard, I'm entering it in my own space? Would somebody be able to, would that logic apply even to those cases? Well, for that, you're going to have to wait till Shabbos is done. So I wish you a wonderful, wonderful day, and we'll pick up, God willing, literally at the top of Mem Vav Amud Aleph. I mean, maybe Eli might do the beginning of the Mishnah again. I couldn't blame him if he did, but hopefully we'll be able to continue, and looking forward to our learning together. Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
We get everything tomorrow. Because someone says it's going to be
Special Kiddush tomorrow because wonderful that there's a special Kiddush. A birthday Kiddush tomorrow. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.